The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains of Sarah and Daniel's bedroom, casting soft shadows on the walls. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Sarah had already prepared coffee and was scrolling through her phone, half listening to the hum of the morning news playing in the background. Daniel, on the other hand, was getting dressed for work, his mind still half asleep. They'd been married for 5 years, and over time, the early sparks of their romance had faded into routine. The small gestures of affection had become rare, replaced by the busyness of their respective careers, mutual responsibilities, and quiet, unspoken frustrations. Today, however, something felt off. There was a tension between them that had been growing ever since Sarah had started working with Lucas, her new co-worker. She didn't talk about it much, but Daniel couldn't ignore the little changes, her late-night texts, the time she started spending at work, and the way she would sometimes smile at her phone when his name popped up. Daniel, who had always been the more reserved of the two, felt a small seed of doubt take root in his mind. He tried to push it away, but it lingered like an itch he couldn't scratch. It wasn't until that fateful morning that everything would come to a head. As Daniel was tying his shoes, Sarah said casually, almost in passing, "If it ever came down to it, I'd choose Lucas over you." Daniel paused, a puzzled expression crossing his face. He thought she was joking at first, but the look on her face, one that seemed to hold both seriousness and a hint of frustration, made him stop in his tracks. "What?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. Sarah's words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. She shrugged, a slight smirk on her lips. "I don't know. He gets me. You don't anymore. If I had to choose, I'd pick him." The words stung in a way Daniel wasn't prepared for. It wasn't the first time they'd argued, but this felt different. There was something cold, something final, about what she'd said. He didn't know how to respond. Part of him wanted to lash out, to ask what had happened to the woman he once knew. But another part of him, the quieter part, wondered if she was just being honest, if this was, in some twisted way, a cry for help. "I don't think you mean that," he said, his voice quieter now, more measured. But Sarah didn't answer. She simply looked at him, her gaze unreadable. And just like that, the words she'd said lingered in the silence between them, setting the stage for a reality neither of them had expected. From that moment on, things would never be the same. In the days that followed, Daniel couldn't shake the sting of Sarah's words. The casual, almost careless tone in which she had said them kept echoing in his mind. It wasn't just what she said. It was a finality in her voice that haunted him. "I'd choose Lucas over you." The statement wasn't something he could just ignore, no matter how hard he tried. It lingered in every conversation they had, in every interaction. The first few days after the argument felt strained. Sarah seemed distant, almost avoidant. She'd laugh a little too hard at jokes her co-workers made during dinner conversations, and her eyes would always dart toward her phone when a message popped up. Daniel noticed the small things, the way she no longer made an effort to ask about his day or plan dinner together. She was there physically, but emotionally, she felt miles away. At night, while Sarah was deep in her phone, replying to texts with quick, almost mechanical responses, Daniel's mind raced. He couldn't help but replay her words over and over. Who was this Lucas guy? Was he just a harmless colleague? Or was something more brewing between them? Sarah had never been the type to express dissatisfaction openly, but now he could sense it in every glance, every offhand comment, every touch that didn't feel the same anymore. It was one evening after dinner, as they sat in the living room, Sarah thumbing through a book and Daniel flipping through channels, that he finally broke the silence. "Are you seeing him?" The question was simple, yet it felt like it carried the weight of everything. Sarah paused, her fingers still hovering over the page she was pretending to read. She didn't look at him. She didn't have to. The tension in the room was palpable. "No, Daniel, I'm not seeing him," she replied, her tone flat. Daniel couldn't tell if he felt relieved or even more unsettled. Was she lying, or was she telling the truth, just not the whole truth? The days that followed felt like a slow burn. Sarah would leave for work in the mornings, and Daniel would try to focus on his own tasks. He'd go for a run or catch up on emails, but his thoughts always returned to her and Lucas. She'd stay late at the office more often now, sometimes coming home past midnight, exhausted but always offering some vague excuse. The distance between them seemed to grow, like a vast canyon that neither of them knew how to cross. One afternoon, Daniel's curiosity got the best of him. He knew it was a breach of trust, but he couldn't resist. He picked up Sarah's phone from the coffee table. Her face was absent from the screen, but the lock was easily bypassed with a swipe. He felt a sudden pang of guilt, but that quickly turned to resolve. He needed to know. As soon as he opened her messages, he found what he was looking for. Lucas. The messages were casual at first, work-related banter, inside jokes, memes. But as he scrolled further, he noticed a shift. There were flirty emojis, comments about how Sarah looked that day, how she smelled, how much he enjoyed spending time with her. The more Daniel read, the deeper the pit grew in his stomach. "What is this?" Daniel muttered, his hands shaking. He set the phone down and ran his hands through his hair. His mind raced. It wasn't just a harmless friendship. Not anymore. The emotional connection between them was undeniable. But there was no time to dwell. Sarah was home. She walked in just then, dropping her bag on the couch. Her eyes met Daniel's, and for a moment, she hesitated. There was something in the air between them, an unspoken tension that had been building for weeks. But this time it was different. This time, Daniel wasn't going to let it slide. "Are you seeing him?" Daniel asked again, his voice firmer now. He was past the point of hesitating. Sarah froze, a flicker of panic crossing her face. She didn't respond immediately, her eyes darting to the phone on the table. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "I saw the messages, Sarah," Daniel said, his voice rising. "I saw what's been going on between you two." Sarah's face turned pale. Her throat tightened, as if she couldn't find the right words to say. She wasn't denying it, but she wasn't admitting it either. "Daniel, it's not what you think," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lucas and it's complicated. It's nothing like what you're imagining." "Then what is it?" Daniel demanded. "Because I don't understand. You say you'd pick him over me. You spend all your time with him. You've been acting like I don't even exist." His voice cracked at the last part, a mix of frustration and heartbreak seeping through. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes now avoiding his gaze. She walked toward the window, her back to him, the weight of her words heavy between them. "I don't know, Daniel. I don't know what's happened," she said softly. "Maybe I've just been feeling lonely. You've been so distant lately. And Lucas, he listens to me. He understands me in ways you don't. I never meant for any of this to happen, but it did." Her words struck Daniel like a punch to the gut. He had been distant. That much was true. Their marriage had become a routine, a series of mechanical actions with no real connection. But hearing it from her, hearing how she had found someone else to listen to her, to understand her, was like a slap in the face. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, turning around to face him. Her eyes were wet now, but Daniel wasn't sure if it was regret or something else. "I never meant to hurt you." But the damage had already been done. The weeks following their confrontation were a blur of cold silence and unspoken tension. Sarah had apologized, but the damage was done. Daniel no longer saw her as the woman he had married. He saw a stranger, someone who had been hiding her true feelings from him for far too long. Her words echoed in his mind every day. "I'd choose Lucas over you." Despite the apology, Daniel couldn't move past it. It wasn't just about what Sarah had said. It was about the emotional betrayal that followed. It was about the growing realization that their marriage had been a fragile facade for a long time. He wasn't sure if Sarah even saw it that way, or if she was simply reacting to her own unmet needs. Either way, the trust between them had been shattered. He found himself obsessing over the thought of her with Lucas. What did she see in him that she couldn't find in their marriage? Was it just companionship? Or was there something more? That question gnawed at him, and his thoughts began to spiral. He needed answers. He needed to confront Lucas. But more than that, he needed to know if Sarah was truly committed to their marriage, or she had already made her choice. One Friday evening, Daniel came home early from work. He wasn't sure what he planned to do, but he knew that he couldn't let this linger any longer. He had to know the truth, and he couldn't keep letting Sarah's distance and secretive behavior tear him apart. Sarah wasn't home yet, but her bag was by the door, a sign that she had arrived from work. Daniel paced the living room, his fingers tightening around the edges of his shirt. His breath quickened, his chest tight with anticipation. He didn't know what he was going to say, but he knew he had to say something. A few minutes later, Sarah came through the door. She looked tired, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, her eyes slightly bloodshot, as if she hadn't been sleeping well. When she saw Daniel, her face briefly faltered before she masked it with a forced smile. "Hey," she said, setting her things down by the couch. "What's up?" Daniel stood still, trying to steady his emotions. He couldn't back down now. He couldn't let her continue to slip through his fingers. He needed to get this out in the open once and for all. "We need to talk," Daniel said, his voice quieter than he intended but firm. Sarah frowned, her eyes darting toward the kitchen. "About what?" "About you and Lucas." Sarah stiffened at the mention of his name, and her gaze flickered away, clearly uncomfortable. "Daniel, I already told you, there's nothing going on between us. It's just work stuff." "It's not just work, Sarah." Daniel shot back, his frustration building. "I've seen the messages. I know what's been happening. I don't know what kind of relationship you two have, but it's not just work. You can't keep lying to me about it." Sarah's lips parted in disbelief, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. She looked almost shocked, as if she hadn't expected Daniel to confront her so directly. But her eyes soon hardened, and the defensive walls went up. "So you went to my phone?" Daniel didn't flinch. "I had to know. Sarah, I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when I could feel something was wrong." His voice broke slightly, the pain of betrayal evident. Sarah sighed and crossed her arms. "I never asked for this to happen, Daniel. I never intended for it to go this far. But we've been falling apart for months. I don't know how to explain it, but Lucas makes me feel seen. I felt invisible for so long, and when he talks to me, I don't feel like I'm just a wife. I feel like I matter." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. Invisible? That word hit him harder than anything else. It was the truth, wasn't it? He had been so consumed by his own work, his own stress, that he had let Sarah slip through his fingers. He hadn't seen her, hadn't noticed how much she needed him. "You matter to me, Sarah," he said softly, the words coming out with a quiet desperation. "I've just been," he faltered. "I've been distant, yes, but I never meant for you to feel invisible. I've always cared about you. Always." She shook her head, her eyes filling with frustration. "But that's just it, Daniel. You didn't see me. You were so wrapped up in your own world that you didn't notice how much I was hurting, how much I needed you to be there." Her voice broke as she spoke, the pain of her words clear. A heavy silence hung between them, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Daniel didn't know what to say. He wanted to tell her that he could change, that he could be what she needed, but the truth was, he wasn't sure if he could fix everything. "I don't know how we got here," Sarah continued, her voice quieter now. "But I know one thing. I'm not happy, Daniel. And I don't think you are either." She wiped a tear from her cheek and took a deep breath. "I don't know if I can keep living like this." Daniel felt his heart drop. He wasn't ready to hear those words. Not yet. But as much as he didn't want to admit it, he knew she was right. They had been living in separate worlds for far too long. They were two people who had drifted so far apart that they barely recognized each other anymore. "Sarah, please, don't do this," Daniel pleaded, taking a step toward her. But Sarah didn't move. Instead, she took a long breath, her eyes lowering. I think I need to figure things out. I don't know if I can keep doing this." For the first time, Daniel understood. He understood that he was standing on the edge of something that couldn't be undone. He had already lost her, not to Lucas, but to the distance that had crept between them. The realization hit him like a wave, crashing over him with such force that he was left breathless. "Sarah, please don't leave me," Daniel whispered, the words escaping before he could stop them. But Sarah didn't answer. Instead, she simply turned away, walking toward the door. And in that moment, Daniel knew that their marriage might already be over. The days after Sarah's admission were the longest of Daniel's life. He was consumed by a sense of overwhelming loss, as if everything he had known about his marriage had unraveled in a matter of hours. The conversation with Sarah had been a gut punch, one that left him reeling. There was no clear resolution, no cathartic release. There was only the cold, painful truth that they had drifted too far apart to simply fix things with a few heartfelt words. For the first few days, Sarah didn't leave. She stayed in the house, moving through it like a ghost. The silence between them was deafening. The familiar routines they once shared, the morning coffee, the quiet evening spent together, had all but evaporated. Daniel would come home from work to find Sarah either on the couch, lost in her phone, or locked away in their bedroom. She was physically there, but emotionally distant. Daniel tried to reach her, tried to engage her, but every attempt was met with a wall. She was polite, civil even, but it was clear that she had already checked out emotionally. Each conversation felt like it was happening in another reality, one where they were strangers, or perhaps roommates, rather than the couple who had once shared a life full of love and laughter. It was on the fourth day after their conversation that Daniel found himself at the breaking point. He had been pacing the apartment, his mind racing with thoughts of Sarah and Lucas. Had Sarah already made her choice? Was this it? Was she leaving him for good? He didn't know how much longer he could endure this slow burn of uncertainty. He was sitting on the edge of their bed when Sarah finally came into the room. She was dressed casually, her hair loose, and for a brief moment, Daniel thought maybe she was going to talk. But there was no warmth in her expression, no sign of the woman he once knew. Instead, she stood there, arms crossed, her gaze avoiding his. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice steady, but there was a tremor underneath it, one that betrayed her calm exterior. Daniel's heart stopped. "What do you mean, you're leaving?" She looked at him then, her eyes filled with sadness but also determination. "I think you know what I mean, Daniel. I can't keep doing this. I need space. I need time. I need to figure things out. And I don't think I can do that here with you." The words hit him harder than he ever expected. It wasn't just the idea that she was leaving him. It was the finality of it, the acknowledgement that their marriage, everything they had built, was on the verge of collapse. "Is it Lucas?" Daniel asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. He had to know. "Are you leaving me for him?" Sarah's eyes flickered for just a moment. Then she shook her head. "No, Daniel, it's not just about him. It's about me, about what I need. And right now, I need to figure out who I am without you." The words cut through him, each one a knife to his heart. He stood up, a wave of desperation crashing over him. "Sarah, please," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. We can work through it. I know I've made mistakes, but I love you. I don't want to lose you." Sarah's face softened for a moment, but only for a moment. "I love you too, Daniel. But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes it's just too late." And with that, she turned and walked out of the room. The sound of the door closing behind her felt like the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. Daniel stood there, motionless, his heart heavy in his chest. He had wanted to fix it, wanted to make everything right. But he knew, deep down, that it was too late. Sarah had made her decision, and in some way, he had known she would. For the next few hours, Daniel was in a daze. He wandered around the apartment, touching the things that reminded him of Sarah, her favorite mug in the kitchen, the books she left scattered on the coffee table, the photos of the two of them together. Each item felt like a betrayal, as if their shared memories were turning into ghosts that no longer had a place in his life. He couldn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, looking for answers in things that had long since lost their meaning. He saw the pictures of Sarah with Lucas, the messages he had read before, flirty comments, shared laughter, moments that he would never be a part of. The realization hit him harder than anything. She had already moved on. The next few days were a blur. Sarah had packed a bag and left the apartment. She didn't say where she was going, didn't give him any indication of when or if she would return. He called her, texted her, but there was no reply. It was as if she had vanished from his life entirely. During this time, Daniel's emotions ran wild. He was angry, heartbroken, confused. Every time he thought about their relationship, he was filled with a sense of overwhelming regret. He thought about the times when he had been too busy with work to spend time with her, the moments when he had been too tired to listen, too focused on the mundane to notice the cracks forming beneath the surface. He had taken her for granted, and now she was gone. But even through the pain, Daniel couldn't shake the question that had been plaguing him for days. What now? He knew he couldn't keep living like this. He couldn't wait around for Sarah to come back, to decide if she was going to give their marriage another chance. He had to make a choice for himself. He had to decide whether he was willing to move on, to let go of the past, and start over. One evening, after days of trying to contact Sarah with no response, Daniel decided to go to her work. He didn't know what he hoped to achieve. Maybe he wanted answers, or maybe he just wanted to see her one last time. He had to know if there was a chance, however small, that they could salvage their relationship. When he arrived, he found Sarah's car in the parking lot. His heart raced as he walked toward the entrance. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew this would be the final moment. The moment where they would either walk away from each other for good or face the truth of what had happened between them. As he stepped inside, he saw her talking to Lucas near the coffee machine. Their conversation was light, casual, but the way Lucas was standing, too close to her, made Daniel's stomach churn. He didn't want to intrude, didn't want to make things more difficult for Sarah, but he couldn't help himself. He had to speak to her. He approached slowly, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, can we talk?" Sarah looked up, her face faltering as she saw him. For a moment, she seemed unsure whether to step away from Lucas, but then she gave a small nod, signaling him to follow her outside. When they were alone, Daniel took a deep breath. I need to understand, Sarah. Why him? Why now?" Her eyes softened, and she looked away, as if searching for the right words. "I don't know, Daniel. I don't know why it had to be like this. But you have to understand, I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not." He nodded, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "So this is it then? You're done." She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted to the ground, and for a brief moment, Daniel saw a flicker of regret in her eyes. But then she lifted her chin, her expression hardening. "I don't know what else to say, Daniel. I think we've both known for a long time that this was coming." And with that, she turned and walked away, this time without looking back. The week that followed Sarah's departure was a blur of emotion for Daniel. He had never felt more alone. The apartment, once a home filled with laughter and warmth, now felt like a hollow shell. The silence was deafening. Every room reminded him of what he had lost, and every thought reminded him of how he had failed her. His days were consumed by the same questions that had been plaguing him since the night of their argument. Could he have done more? Should he have tried harder to save their marriage? One late evening, as he sat on the couch staring at an empty wall, Daniel received a message from Sarah. It was a simple text, but the words were like a spark to dry tinder. "I've been thinking about everything. Can we meet?" His heart skipped a beat. He stared at the message for a few moments, wondering if this was a conversation he had been waiting for, the one where they could finally clear the air and either move forward together or say goodbye for good. He didn't know what would happen next, but he couldn't ignore the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. The next day, Daniel met Sarah at a small cafe they used to visit together. It was a place that had always been their escape, a place where they could just be themselves, away from the noise of life. As soon as he saw her sitting by the window, his chest tightened. She looked different. She was still Sarah, the same woman he had fallen in love with. But there was a sadness in her eyes, a weight she hadn't carried before. He sat down across from her, unsure what to say, his heart pounding in his chest. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. There was so much that needed to be said, but words felt inadequate. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "I've been thinking about everything," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to hurt you, Daniel. I never wanted to hurt you. But I feel like we lost something a long time ago. We stopped talking. We stopped listening. And it wasn't just about Lucas. It wasn't just about the affair, or whatever you want to call it. It was about me feeling unseen." Daniel's throat tightened as he listened. The words were familiar, but hearing them from her, seeing the raw emotion in her eyes, made him realize just how far they had drifted. It wasn't just about infidelity or betrayal. It was about years of neglect, of taking each other for granted, of not paying attention to the little things that made their relationship whole. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Daniel said, his voice thick with regret. "I was so wrapped up in my own world and my work that I didn't notice what was happening to us. I didn't listen to you when you needed me. I didn't see the signs, and I'm sorry for that." Sarah looked down at her hands, twisting the napkin in her lap. "I didn't exactly make it easy for you, though. I pushed you away. I thought that maybe if I acted like everything was fine, it would just fix itself. But it didn't. I needed more. And when I didn't get it, I turned to someone else." Daniel nodded, feeling a deep sadness settle over him. He understood now. He understood why she had sought someone else, why she had found comfort in Lucas. It wasn't just about infidelity. It was about emotional connection. And in a way, he had failed her by not providing that. "Do you still love me, Sarah?" The question slipped out before Daniel could stop it, and as soon as it did, he regretted it. He didn't want to pressure her, didn't want to make her feel obligated to give him an answer she wasn't ready to provide. But it had to be asked. Sarah hesitated, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something. "I don't know," she finally said, her voice soft and fragile. "I love you, Daniel. I always will. But I'm not sure if love is enough anymore. I think I need time to figure out who I am without you." Daniel swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if he was relieved or devastated by her words. But in that moment, he knew what he had to do. He couldn't keep clinging to something that had already been broken. He had to let her go, not out of anger or spite, but out of love, because he wanted her to find happiness, even if it wasn't with him. "I understand," he said quietly. "I think I've known that too, for a while now. We've both been holding on to something that doesn't fit anymore. And I don't want to keep holding you back, Sarah." She looked at him, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "I don't want to hurt you. I really don't. But I think it's time for both of us to let go." The words stung, but Daniel knew they were the right ones. There was no easy way to walk away from a marriage that had meant everything. But sometimes love wasn't about holding on. It was about knowing when to let go. After that conversation, the separation wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Sarah moved out, taking only a few of her things, leaving the apartment they had shared for so long behind. It wasn't easy, and the weeks that followed were filled with pain, but also a sense of clarity. Daniel found himself grieving not just the end of their marriage, but the years they had wasted, the love they had lost along the way. But as time passed, something inside him began to shift. He realized that he wasn't defined by his marriage to Sarah. He wasn't defined by his failures. He was still the man he had always been, and there was still time to rebuild his life. He started taking better care of himself, rediscovering passions he had long neglected. He reconnected with old friends, started traveling again, and threw himself into his work with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't trying to fill the void Sarah had left. He was learning to fill it with his own strength, with his own growth. And then, months later, when he least expected it, Sarah reached out again. It was a text message, simple but profound. "I've been thinking about you. I miss you." It wasn't a declaration of love or an attempt to rekindle their relationship. It was just a reminder that their connection, though fractured, wasn't completely lost. They had both changed, both grown, and both had a lot of healing to do. But for the first time in a long time, Daniel didn't feel the need to rush into anything. He knew that this time, whatever came next, would be on his own terms. And that, in itself, was a victory. In the end, Daniel learned that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that ultimately lead to the most profound growth. Letting go of Sarah wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he learned to be whole on his own. He had learned that love isn't about possession. It's about understanding, listening, and giving space for both people to grow. Whether or not Sarah would return to his life, Daniel knew one thing for certain. He would be okay. And in that, he found peace. Time, as it always does, moved on. For months after Sarah left, Daniel was caught in a delicate dance between grief and healing. The first few weeks were a blur, filled with sleepless nights and restless days. He struggled to find his footing again, unsure what life looked like without Sarah in it. The pain was sharp, but as the months passed, the edges began to soften. He no longer woke up every morning with the weight of her absence crushing him. Instead, he learned to fill the space she had once occupied with something entirely new: himself. He spent more time rediscovering old hobbies and passions he had once neglected. He started writing again, journals, poetry, and even the beginnings of a novel. He reconnected with friends who had drifted away during his years of neglecting the balance in his life. And slowly, he rebuilt his routine one piece at a time. It wasn't easy, but he found solace in the small moments, like taking long walks in the park, having coffee in silence, or losing himself in a book that made him laugh for the first time in ages. In those quiet moments, Daniel began to realize that his identity wasn't tied to his marriage. He wasn't defined by the loss of Sarah or the failure of their relationship. He was more than just a husband, more than just a man who had loved and lost. He was a person in his own right, someone worthy of self-love and healing. Then, out of the blue, Sarah reached out. It wasn't the grand reconciliation he had imagined in his most desperate moments, but it was a step towards something new. Her message, simple and unassuming, opened the door to a future where they might both find a way to be in each other's lives, not as they once were, but as two people who had shared something deep and had learned from it. "I miss you," her message said, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel didn't feel the pang of loss. Instead, he felt a sense of peace. Maybe their paths would cross again. Maybe they wouldn't. But Daniel understood now that the ending of their relationship wasn't a failure. It was a lesson. It had taught him about love, about letting go, and most importantly, about growth. They had each walked a different path since their separation, but those paths had led them both to something greater: understanding, healing, and acceptance. He didn't need Sarah to complete him anymore. He had learned to stand on his own, and for that, he was grateful. As he stared out a window one evening, the sky painted with a warm glow of sunset, Daniel knew that the story wasn't over, not just for him, but for them. No matter what the future held, he had found his way back to himself, and that, in itself, was enough.